in 1999, the USA handed control of the Panama Canal back to Panama, and now contention has hit that region once again. The Panama Canal is a key trade route which connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans across America, inspired in part by the Suez Canal in the Middle East. Control was given to Panama by the Torrijos-Carter Treaty on the condition that Panama should keep access neutral. In keeping with this promise, Panama created the independent Panama Canal Authority, which sets toll prices for ships crossing the canal based on their cargo size and value. It does not charge different countries different prices. I really want to emphasize that because a lot of Americans are confused about that last point, but a lot of Americans are confused about a lot of things. They do write the date wrong, after all. On the 21st of December last year, President-elect Donald Trump declared that Panama was violating the treaty by charging American ships too much to cross. Politico reported on Trump's statements. It is unclear what spurred Donald Trump's invective. It is unclear what spurred Donald Trump's invective about the canal. While China has increased its presence in Latin America over the last 2 decades, and a Hong Kong-based company administers the 2 ports on each end of the canal, no Chinese commercial or government entity actually has any direct role in managing the flow of vessels through the critical waterway. The canal is administered by an independent Panamanian government agency, the Panama Canal Authority, and China has made no public gestures towards buying the canal or increasing its footprint in the country in recent months. And Donald Trump was not about to give up, as he refused to rule out military action against Panama to take the canal into American control by force. And now Greenland, which is owned by Denmark, but should be owned by the people of Greenland, is under threat from the USA. Trump wants to buy Greenland, you see, and the Danish have already told him that the territory isn't for sale. But as the BBC reports, Trump made the remarks at a freewheeling news conference at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida less than 2 weeks before he is sworn in for his second term as president. Asked if he would rule out using military or economic force in order to take over Greenland or the Panama Canal, Trump said, "No, I can't assure you on either of those two, but I can say we need them for economic security." Nothing would damage the USA's economic security more than getting into fights with their allies, as the French made clear yesterday that they won't take threats to European sovereignty lying down. France has said the European Union will not allow other nations to attack its sovereign borders after the US President-elect Donald Trump refused to rule out using military force to seize Greenland. On Tuesday, Trump reiterated his desire to acquire the autonomous Danish territory, saying it was critical for national and economic security. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot told French radio that there is obviously no question that the European Union would let other nations of the world attack its sovereign borders, whoever they are. Barrot said he did not believe the US was going to invade the vast Arctic island, but he was clear the EU should not let itself be intimidated. But this hasn't put the MAGA weirdos off their game, and like that eccentric TV presenter from the Hunger Games, Jesse Waters went on TV to say this.
At first I wanted it, and I tried to divide it into 2 states. And then I realized we'd be adding Montana, basically, for the Republicans, and electorally like a Texas for the Democrats. And I don't like that. But the fact that they don't want us to take them over makes me want to invade. I want to quench my imperialist thirst.
Bit weird, bit strange, but also you can kind of tell it's a joke. And this is where I want to add a bit of nuance, right? There's this episode of The Simpsons. It's always a good start to a sentence talking about nuance. There's this episode of The Simpsons where Homer decides that it's a good idea to start challenging people to a duel by slapping them with a glove after being inspired by Zorro. And at first, he gets people to back down because no one wants to get into a fight. But he actually ends up getting into a duel. The problem with fighting talk is that if you do it too much, you might actually end up in a fight. In these cases, that fight could affect the entire world if global trade or peace in Europe is impacted. Right? This is like pretty serious stuff. I don't want you to think, though, that my worry is that Donald Trump actually intends to start a war or some kind of conflict directly. We all know that he's more full of bluff and bluster than one of those internet phishing scams. My worry is that he will start talking about something and then lose control of the situation. When you initiate conflict, even just with words, you never know how far it will really go. And that's where I want to turn to Aiden. Aiden, am I being too worried about Trump's threats? And are there other political, potential impacts that we kind of haven't
Hmm.
thought of yet? What do you
I
think?
wouldn't say you're being too worried about them at all because it's like like you say with him, it's he won't actually do it. He won't militarily put troops on the ground in Greenland, but it's a little bit like he kind of got himself into this situation with the border wall with Mexico. He started off by saying we're going to build a wall and we're going to do this and we're going to have helicopters stopping it from happening, and then it just got ahead of itself, and he had to try and build a wall, and we saw the reality of that. It's not even partway done today. And so I think it's a similar thing where he's gonna kind of shout himself into a problem. And like you say, I don't think he's gonna invade Greenland. I don't think these threats he's currently saying are real and will come to fruition. But I definitely think that he's kind of got 3 or 4 in him until something really sticks, and then he has to take action so that his maggots don't really catch up to the bluff.
Maggots as a
Mhm.
as an acronym for the Trump supporting crowd. Yeah, I think the other thing is it's his supporters might move him into action, but also
Mm,
just the reaction from other world leaders,
yeah.
like the Iranians and the Chinese. They will feel like if they don't respond in some way, even verbally, which could just ramp up the tensions,
Mm,
the problem is this kind of idea of
yeah.
escalation, and I could really see that happening, um, especially with the bizarre stuff about invading Canada. It's just like, yeah, it's not connected to reality, but it doesn't have to be dangerous. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly that, yeah. So that's what exactly the problem is with him in general. Nothing he says is connected with reality, really. There's no base on what things could actually happen, but it still doesn't stop it from being harmful. For example, him saying we're going to take the capital, that wasn't based in any reality. And then January 6th happened. It's that's kind of the repeated problems we have with him. I just think it's interesting to see, like you say, how the world leaders will react to him acting like this, because Iran and China and these countries that have a bit more open tension with America, um, they don't need an excuse to show a bit of strength towards the USA. China, I think, is a little bit more diplomatic in that approach, but countries in the Middle East have had enough of American imperialism in their part of the world. They're not going to be afraid of saying, "Hey, you want to act like that? We'll act like this." So it's going to create tensions in a region that's already incredibly tense, and I can't see that being good for anyone involved.
Yeah, the Panama Canal is a particular worry for me because of like the misinformation that goes alongside that. Right? Ships that pass through the Panama Canal are charged based on their cargo size. That's the whole idea of like keeping it neutral. There's like a similar story with the independence of Belgium. Like
Mm,
if you've like studied the history of the British Empire, you'll know that like a great deal of the reason that Britain like attacked various countries in Europe at various times was because they couldn't risk the independence of Belgium because it kept France and Germany separate from each other, and it allowed for a landing point if Britain
mm,
should ever need to attack the continent. Like that is
yeah.
part of that story. And in the case of the Panama the Panama Canal, um, we need to well, I say we, the world global trade needs to be free flowing through there. But it's also just the amount of misinformation by misleading Americans into thinking that they are being overcharged when what it actually is that they bring more stuff through that canal because they are the largest economic
Mm,
force in that region. They're one of the largest economic forces in the world. I think in terms of economy size,
mhm.
GDP size, they are the largest in the world. So they're going to be bringing more ships back and forth through there. They've just got more in global trade than other partners in the region. So they're going to be being charged more. Not because they're America, but because they're just moving more stuff.
Yeah.
It's that misinformation misleading the American public that almost worries me more than the possibility of an invasion of Panama. Um, because that's perhaps even more of a worry to me because that seems more likely that we get led down the garden path, and then you've got the Zuckerberg stuff as well. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that because we're not
Mhm.
covering it today, but we will be covering it later in the week. But it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that and how this relates to information and misinformation. What do you think?
Yeah, it's that. It's because we know that like a sort of disenfranchised America isn't really good for the world, because as much as we try and fight it, America leads in a lot of Western culture, and other places kind of follow. So when MAGA is at its peak, kind of crazy frenzy, going insane about one random subject that they've chosen this week, it can often lead to real terms issues on the ground in America. And so I think and it leads culture, which leads on to talk about Zuckerberg, because now that the culture in America has become so toxic and sort of far right, and with Elon Musk spouting off, a lot of these other billionaires have realized, oh well, this is a power grab. If he's getting away with that, look what I can get away with. I'm nowhere near in the public eye like he is, and so it's pushing people like Zuckerberg to limit free speech on his platforms, because he wants, well, not limit free speech, but he wants to, well, limit free speech because he's trying to kind of contain what it's insane, because it's a move that he's doing it off of the approach of, well, it's free speech because you can say what you want, but it's ultimately not, because there's it's similar to Twitter, whereas if you write the word cis on Twitter, suddenly you get a flag on what you've tweeted. It's exactly the same thing's going to lead down that path with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. So it's just, I think, like you say, this Trumpian kind of bluff leads to very real consequences, and people with severe power in America operating in a way that they otherwise wouldn't, because socially they would have been kept in check.
Yeah, it's certainly heading the same way as Twitter, and of course, I'm only sort of emphasizing this now because we're not going to cover it later in the show, but it does, yeah, it ties into that whole misinformation story and people being constantly misled. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg's control of the media narrative, and people getting all their news from social media now, which in some ways I'm in favor of, because I think that actually the newspapers in the UK are, they're just firmly right wing. They're just so bought out. But on the other hand, now you've got this new thing with Musk and Zuckerberg. It's a different story. I don't know exactly what the media landscape is gonna look like. Yeah, we need to have some sort of response to that.
They're kind of the future's Murdoch, aren't they? That's kind of how I view them.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that they're, at the end of the day, because of their audience size, and because their influence is so much more subtle, they're likely to have more power than Murdoch at some point down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the Greenland situation, I really hope that we don't end up in a conflict, even a conflict of words with America, because I just think that breakdown isn't good for, like, being able to influence, for example, events in the Middle East, in Palestine. Like, our ability to influence those events might be dependent upon whether or not whether or not Donald Trump remains fixed on Greenland, or whether he, like, backs away from that idea. But yeah, obviously Greenland is it's the same story in Greenland, Canada, and Panama. It's that Donald Trump is aggressing on these places because he's got nothing, right? He's come into power, and ultimately he was going on about gas prices and food prices, how they're too high, how they need to come down, and then as soon as he's elected, he's saying, he's the president elect now. He's already backtracking. He's going, well, I don't have any control over the cost of living, price of food, price of gas, but we could, like, invade Panama, or, like, start a war with Europe. And I think a lot of it is distraction. Do you think I'm reading that right?
I think you are. I think that's absolutely the correct kind of point of view on it. I can't see another alternative way of looking at it. It's very much him grasping at straws. It's a little bit like how it's the convenient enemy. The right always has that. They always have. Well, if it's not this, it's that, and it's easy to sling from one side when you're not in power. But as soon as you get in power, conveniently, that's not an issue anymore that you can actually fix. We're seeing. I know we're going to go on to this shortly, but we're seeing it right now with the Conservative government and how they're approaching the grooming gangs and all of this kind of the inquests they want to do. It's like you had how many years in power, and now suddenly it's the number one issue you all care about. It's
Yeah.
insane. It's a useful tool when you're on the benches, and then when you come into power, you abandon it. And so now he's just grasping for something else that he can use that is a lot less tangible.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.